The headache wasn't from a cheap izakaya hangover, it was something tectonic. When consciousness returned, the first thing he noticed wasn't the smell of instant office coffee, but the metallic odor of dried blood and ozone. Akira opened his eyes, expecting the depressing fluorescent light of his cubicle, but was greeted by the gothic gloom of a hall that seemed to have been designed by a decorator with profound depression. He tried to bring his hand to his face to adjust his glasses, but his fingers met only cold, perfect skin. And even more alarming, his hands were not the calloused hands from typing reports. They were elegant claws, adorned with rings that were worth more than his entire apartment in Tokyo. Looking down, he saw the reflection in the polished obsidian floor. That wasn't Akira, the salaryman. That was Takaru, the son of the Demon King, the final boss of the game he had spent the last 1,000 hours hating. Panic rose in Akira's throat like bile. He tried to scream, but the sound that came out wasn't a pathetic squeak, but a deep growl that made the gargoyles on the walls tremble. He was trapped in the body of the villain, destined to be humiliated and killed. If the game's script was correct, he had about 12 chapters before his head rolled. Before he could process the existential horror, the reality before him fractured. With a shrill digital sound that did not belong in that fantasy world, a floating window materialized inches from his nose. It wasn't a clean, bluish user interface. It was a monstrosity of vibrant colors, jagged edges, and aggressive pop art aesthetics. Emerging from the center of the screen, the guide floated. At first glance, it looked like a cute mascot, a sphere with large ears. But then it smiled, and its mouth opened too wide, revealing rows of corrupted data teeth. The first task flashed on the screen in bold red letters: destroy Greenfield Village to establish dominance. Akira felt his stomach churn. The creature began to distort, its cute eyes melting into black pixel holes, warning that refusal would result in painful corrective punishment. The surrounding environment darkened, and the system's pressure weighed upon Takaru's shoulders like an anchor. The tense standoff was interrupted by the thunderous sound of the hall's double doors being flung open. A female figure marched in with the precision of a military metronome. It was Yara, the chief of staff of Darkhold Castle. Dressed in a tactical maid outfit that appeared armored, she dragged a greatsword that was, at the very least, twice her size. With a fluid movement that defied physics, Yara spun the giant blade, using the flat side of the sword to scrape a stain of dried blood from the stone floor, leaving it impeccably clean. She knelt before the throne, devotion shining in her eyes with an almost fanatical intensity. She awaited the order for the massacre. Akira broke into a cold sweat under the heavy robes of the Demon King. If he stuttered, the system would punish him. If he ordered the attack, innocents would die. He needed to act. He needed to be the boss. Straightening his posture on the throne and channeling years of useless corporate meetings, he looked at Yara. The maid interpreted his terrified silence as an aura of supreme and calculating authority. Akira's mind worked at the speed of light. Destroying the village was a waste of resources. It was bad management. With Takaru's deep voice echoing through the hall, he declared that brute destruction was vulgar. Instead of burning the houses, they would annex the local infrastructure for the housing expansion of the servants. Yara blinked, confused for a millisecond, before her eyes sparkled with understanding. To her, that was an even more cruel evil plan. Eternal slavery disguised as benevolence. She saluted with enthusiasm and set off to prepare the acquisition. The guide terminal flashed violently in red. The system did not know how to process real estate reform as an act of villainy. The guide trembled, glitches running through its spherical body, until a green message appeared. Domination accepted. Akira released the breath he was holding, relieved. He had survived the first day. But then, the guide floated to his ear, whispering in a voice that chilled his soul. The tutorial was over, and the next task would not accept peaceful solutions. The silence that settled in the throne hall after Yara's departure was heavy, almost solid. Akira collapsed onto the obsidian throne, his regal posture as the Demon King instantly melting into that of a salaryman who had just survived a mass layoff. He massaged his temples, feeling the cold sweat dry under the collar of his gothic attire. The guide floated in the distance, humming an 8-bit melody, seemingly entertained by his host's near-nervous breakdown. Seeking any advantage that could help him survive the next 11 chapters, Akira began rummaging through the throne's secret compartments, acting as if he were looking for pens at the back of an office drawer. His fingers found something cold and heavy. It was a ring. The object had a brutalist design, with a dark metal band and a central gem that looked like a block of solid darkness. A system window popped up in his vision describing the item: Intent Translation Ring. Akira's eyes gleamed. Without hesitation, he slid the ring onto his finger. The metal contracted with a dry snap, fastening itself to his flesh like a shackle. Before he could admire the new accessory, the castle floor shook. It wasn't an earthquake. It was footsteps. The hall's double doors, which stood 5 meters high, were flung open with a crash that sent dust falling from the gargoyles on the ceiling. A massive silhouette blocked the light from the corridor. Entering the room with the subtlety of a derailed freight train was General Zog. The creature was a caricature of steroids and violence. His muscles had muscles, and his metal pauldrons were so wide that he had to enter sideways, scraping the spikes against the stone doorframe. Akira felt tiny. Zog marched to the base of the throne and threw himself onto his knees, cracking the pristine floor that Yara had just cleaned. The general's head, disproportionately small compared to his colossal body, looked up, revealing canine teeth that looked like daggers. He roared a greeting that sounded like gravel being crushed, awaiting orders for the next massacre campaign on the western border. Akira swallowed hard, but Takeru's body showed no fear. He knew that Zog was famous in the game for his excessive brutality and lack of strategic thinking. He was the type of employee who would solve a printer problem with a two-handed axe. If Akira wanted to reform the demon faction's image, he needed to start with staff training. He needed to implement a culture of soft power. Leaning forward, Akira decided to give some constructive feedback. He planned his words carefully, aiming for efficiency and the reduction of collateral damage. He explained, with the calm voice of a mentor, that brute violence was a waste of energy. He suggested that Zog should focus on intimidating enemies psychologically instead of crushing them physically, saving resources and avoiding the blood cleanup afterward. As Akira spoke about empathy and efficiency, the ring on his finger pulsed. Sparks of solid darkness, shaped like small irregular triangles, began to emanate from the black gem. He felt a strange vibration, as if his words were passing through a distortion processor before reaching the general's ears. Zog's face, initially confused, began to light up with a horrific understanding. Where Akira said, "We don't need to break all of their bones," the ring translated into a guttural frequency that sounded like, "Breaking bones is too fast. Keep them whole to prolong the agony." When Akira suggested using your head, Zog heard an order to collect skulls as decorative trophies. The general began to tremble, not with fear, but with pure sadistic admiration. Thick tears streamed from his white eyes, and he looked at his master as if he were standing before a god of innovative cruelty. Zog leapt up, the ground cracking again beneath his boots. He shouted that he had never thought of such a level of refinement in pain, and that he would immediately head to the border to test this new management methodology. Before Akira could scream, "Wait, that's not what I meant," the general spun on his heels and dashed out like a child who had just received a new and dangerous toy. Akira reached out to stop him, but the ring flashed again, and the sound that escaped his throat was a low, menacing laugh that echoed through the empty hall. He looked at the cursed accessory on his finger, horrified. The guide reappeared at his side, displaying a pixelated thumbs-up emoji, clearly approving of the increase in the efficiency of tyranny. Akira realized, too late, that trying to be a good boss in hell only resulted in promotions for the demons. The dust kicked up by General Zog's catastrophic departure still danced in the beams of light that pierced through the castle's Gothic windows. Akira remained motionless on the throne, his gaze fixed on the cracks in the floor where his subordinate had knelt with excessive force. The intent translation ring pulsed on his finger, a warm metallic reminder that his attempt at diplomacy had resulted in a potential war crime. He felt bile rise in his throat. If he couldn't control the army, and if he couldn't control his own voice, he needed to control something smaller, something tangible. His Demon King eyes swept across the hall. Akira stood up abruptly, his black cape whipping the air. He decided that if he were to live in hell, that hell would have to undergo an organization and cleaning audit immediately. Hours later, the corridors of Darkhold had undergone a transmutation that defied the logic of medieval fantasy. Akira, driven by a maniacal energy of reality denial, used his matter creation powers to implement any HR manager's wet dream. Where there were once statues of demons devouring souls, there now stood perfectly symmetrical rows of dark wood cubicles. Water coolers with purified water bubbled alongside cursed suits of armor, and the smell of sulfur was replaced by the sterile aroma of cleaning products. The low-ranking monsters, skeletons, and imps who made up the administrative workforce wandered confused through the new layout. A skeleton tried to sit in an ergonomic chair without catching its tailbone, while an orc stared suspiciously at an Excel spreadsheet printed on human skin parchment. Akira watched everything from the mezzanine, holding a clipboard. The symmetry calmed him. Bureaucracy was safe. No one died filling out forms in triplicate. However, the castle's ancient dust resisted. It was then that Yara emerged from the shadows, materializing beside her master with the silent lethality of a predator. Her large eyes scanned the new workspace, absorbing the radical change. Akira felt a shiver and, pointing to a corner where soot was accumulating, murmured a vague request for hygiene. The ring on her finger glowed with a black light, distorting his desire for cleaning into a concept of absolute purification of existence. Yara did not reach for a duster. She drew her gigantic greatsword, the blade reflecting the fluorescent light of the new magic orbs. With a movement that broke the sound barrier, she executed the absolute cleaning technique. The wind pressure generated by the strike did not cut the wall, but atomically disintegrated every particle of dirt within a 30-meter radius. The corridor became immaculate, polished by the violence of the impact. She gave a perfect bow, the skirt of her maid dress not even swaying from the gale she herself had created. Akira adjusted his collar, trying not to show that he had nearly had a heart attack from the demonstration of domestic strength. He praised the work, hoping to reinforce the positive behavior. Yara, with a fanatical gleam in her eyes, interpreted the office restructuring aloud. To her, the uniformity of the cubicles was not about ergonomics, but a psychological warfare tactic to disorient enemy spies who would lose themselves in the labyrinth of corporate mediocrity. She praised the master's vision of breaking the invader's spirit through absolute and oppressive order. The guide appeared floating over one of the water coolers, displaying a progress bar that indicated fear consolidation 15%. Akira sighed, defeated. Even his attempt to create a healthy work environment was being distorted by the world's narrative to look like a mental torture dungeon. At least it was clean. The bubble of bureaucratic normalcy was burst when the double doors swung open again. This time, it wasn't a muscular giant, but a gargoyle messenger, panting and with a chipped wing. He ignored the cubicles and flew straight to Akira's feet, delivering a scroll stained with fresh blood. Yara intercepted the object, sterilizing it with a glare before passing it to the master. As he unrolled the paper, Akira read the urgent report from the outer patrols. It wasn't good news regarding Zog's expansion. On the contrary, someone was decimating the advanced forces of the demon army with terrifying speed. The report described a lone warrior in shining white armor, screaming about justice and friendship while slicing ogres in half. Akira felt his stomach drop. Hiro Kaido was coming, and he was way ahead of schedule. The tense silence that followed the reading of the report on the hero's progress was brutally murdered by the sound of shattering glass. One of the administrative sector's newly polished Gothic windows exploded inward, bringing with it a shower of shards and, worse, a mud-covered adventurer. The intruder, a young man in generic armor and a tattered cape, landed in the center of the immaculate carpet, screaming platitudes about justice and the defeat of evil, while his dirty shoes left unforgivable marks on the floor. On the mezzanine, Takeru felt his salaryman heart stop for a second, not out of fear of death, but because of the audacity of the mess. Beside him, Yara's aura shifted instantly. The loyal maid did not see a warrior of light. She saw an agent of sanitary chaos. Her hand went to the hilt of her greatsword, ready to perform a terminal cleaning on the intruder, but Takeru raised his hand, calling for calm. The guide appeared immediately, its red pop-up windows vibrating with the sadistic demand that the Demon King crush the insolent insect to set an example. The invading hero, perceiving the Dark Lord's hesitation, took it as an opening. With a shrill war cry, he charged forward, his blade aiming for Takeru's neck. To Akira's racing mind, the scene unfolded in slow motion. He activated his administrator's vision, not to see vital points, but to analyze the opponent's level. He was a rank C, an intern in the world of heroism. Killing him would be a waste of human resources and an unnecessary stain on his resume. When the sword was millimeters from hitting him, Takeru moved. Not with the grace of a warrior, but with the efficiency of someone who had caught hundreds of papers falling from a desk. He pinched the hero's blade between his index finger and thumb. The metallic sound of the abrupt stop echoed through the silent hall. The rank C hero froze, his eyes wide with terror, as he saw that his strongest attack had been halted with the same effort used to hold a pen. The status difference was absolute, an insurmountable barrier between a mortal and a natural disaster. Taking advantage of the invader's catatonic shock, Takeru sighed, letting show all the exhaustion of someone who just wanted to finish their shift in peace. With his free hand, he did not conjure a fireball, but materialized a standard recruitment form. He thrust the paper toward the trembling hero, the castle's dramatic lighting making the document look like a profane pact sealed in blood, even though the fine print merely described dental coverage and transportation vouchers. With a deep voice, amplified by the hall's acoustics, Takeru suggested that a career as a home invader was unstable and dangerous, offering an alternative in the organization's asset security. The hero, faced with the choice between certain death by Yara's sword vibrating in the background and signing that terrifying paper, chose survival. He signed the contract with trembling hands, selling his loyalty for a health plan, while the guide watched in frustration, yet validated the action as contractual slavery, which ironically increased the evil bar. Far away, Atop a windswept hill overlooking the renovated castle, a lone figure watched. Kaido stood motionless, his white armor shining like a beacon of justice against the gray sky. His eyes, sharpened by high-level tracking skills, saw the exact moment the lesser hero was subjugated by the Demon King through the broken window. To Kaido, it didn't look like recruitment. It looked as if the villain had captured the warrior's soul with a simple touch. He gripped the hilt of his sword, righteous fury swelling in his chest, ready to descend the hill and initiate the final confrontation. But then, he saw something that made him freeze. Across the distance, he saw the Demon King turn his back to the window and reach a hand to the back of his neck, scratching it with a clumsy and specific movement, a nervous tick that Kaido knew from another life. The familiarity of that simple gesture, so human and out of place in that monster, planted a seed of doubt in the hero's heart, making him hesitate in his lightning-fast attack. Glass dust still danced in the light streaming through the broken office window. While Yara oversaw the replacement of the stained glass with the silent efficiency of someone hiding a body, Takeru collapsed into his leather chair. The forced recruitment of the invading hero had worked, but his stress levels were dangerously high. He reached for the back of his neck, repeating that nervous scratching gesture that had become his only physical comfort, unaware that miles away, this simple movement had saved his life by confusing Hiro Kaito. But an evil CEO's rest is brief. The air around his desk flickered with vibrant, sickening colors. The guide materialized, floating over a pile of expense reports. Its cute mascot form contrasted with the red error windows orbiting its head like satellites of ill omen. The system was satisfied with the previous contractual slavery, but the narrative demanded escalation. A new mandatory task notification flashed across Akira's retina with the subtlety of a punch. Kidnap Princess Elara of the Kingdom of Luminous. Deadline. Immediate. Takeru sighed, his salaryman soul weeping internally. It wouldn't be a kidnapping, he decided as he signed the mission order for Yara. It would be a hostile acquisition of an external consultant. Consciousness returned to Princess Elara not with the cold dampness of a dungeon, but with the scent of lavender and absurdly high thread count sheets. She opened her eyes, expecting to see chains and torturers, but instead found a high ceiling decorated with restored Gothic frescoes and a flawless crystal chandelier. She sat up abruptly in the king-size bed, her hands instinctively reaching for the crystal pendant around her neck. It was intact, no chains, no bars, only a massive window overlooking the terrifying abyss that surrounded Darkhold Castle. The massive oak door opened silently. Takeru entered, wearing his Demon King grandeur-like armor. He stopped at a respectful distance, crossing his arms to hide the trembling in his hands. In his deepest, most rehearsed voice, he informed her that she was a long-term guest due to sensitive geopolitical negotiations. Before Elara could scream or conjure magic, he pointed to a side table. There was a room service menu and a magical communication crystal with unlimited access to the continent's news network. The princess blinked, her large eyes darting between the monster in front of her and the plate of fresh fruit cut into perfect geometric shapes. This was not a captivity. It was a compulsory corporate stay. Elara's confusion turned into work when Takeru revealed the true reason for his immediate visit. He needed an image audit. He snapped his fingers, and with a thud that made the floor tremble, General Zog tried to enter the room. The colossus of muscle had to walk sideways to fit through the door, his spiked pauldron scraping the freshly painted frame. The mission was simple. Zog needed to learn how to serve tea without crushing the porcelain, an exercise in fine motor control that Akira considered essential to reducing the accidental lethality of his subordinates. The scene that followed was a theater of the absurd. Elara, sitting with a straight back and her notebook, watched as the 10-foot monster, sweating buckets from the tension, tried to pinch the handle of a delicate teacup with fingers the thickness of salamis. In the background, Yara sharpened her greatsword with a slow and menacing rhythm, ensuring the princess cooperated with the consultancy. When Zog finally managed to place the cup on the table without pulverizing it, he let out a roar of victory so loud that the windows vibrated. Elara noted in her notebook, "Candidate demonstrates excessive enthusiasm, but lacks refinement in delivery." For the first time, she felt no fear, but rather a strange administrative pity for those creatures. When Zog and Yara left the room, leaving only the Demon King and his hostage, the atmosphere changed. Takeru looked exhausted, his shoulders dropping millimeters when he thought she wasn't looking. He asked if the accommodations were adequate, using a tone of voice that sounded more like an HR manager concerned about a labor lawsuit than a tyrant. Elara closed her notebook slowly, her analytical eyes fixed on his shadowed face. She stood up and walked toward him, stopping at a distance that would have been suicidal if the legends were true. Fear had given way to a sharp intellectual curiosity. With a steady voice that echoed in the silence of the Golden Suite, she threw the question that made Akira's human heart skip a beat. "Who are you really?" The Takaru of legends would burn my kingdom before offering me tea. You? Do you even know how to be evil without an instruction manual? Thoughtful Princess Ilara's question hung in the magically conditioned air of the luxury suite, heavy as an anchor. Who are you really? She had asked, dismantling the Demon King facade with the precision of a scalpel. Takeru felt cold sweat trickling down beneath his heavy robes. His human heart beat erratically against the ribs of a monster, screaming for him to confess, to say he was just a tired salaryman trapped in an RPG nightmare. But beside the princess's head, invisible to her, the guide floated with a pixelated, sadistic smile, holding a neon sign that read, "Character break as corporal punishment." Takeru swallowed hard, forcing his voice down octaves into the deep register of a tyrant. He adjusted the collar of his outfit with a calculated rigidity and replied that the true nature of evil was efficiency, and that she was mistaking kindness for human resource management. Before Ilara could counter that corporate word salad, a pulsing red light invaded the room from the hallway, the perimeter intrusion alarm, saved by the bell of doom. Silently thanking the catastrophic interruption, Takeru spun on his heels, his cape whipping the air dramatically as he left the princess behind with a hurried apology about security emergencies. He marched through the corridors to the throne room, where the open-plan office environment was in ordered chaos. Low-level monsters scurried about with papers, while the guide's terminal materialized over the obsidian table that served as a throne. The terminal's aggressive interface projected a high-definition hologram in the middle of the hall. The guide, now wearing a small film director's headset, pointed at the screen with maniacal enthusiasm. The external defenses of Observation Hill were being dismantled, not by an army, but by a single unit. Takeru approached, leaning his hands on the table, his eyes narrowing as he tried to focus on the figure glowing with an excess of holy light particle effects. On the floating screen, the intruder moved with a fluidity that defied basic physics. It was the hero, Kaito. Takeru watched at first with the technical disdain of an MMORPG veteran. He noticed how the hero canceled basic attack animations to chain together perfect dodges, an advanced technique that wasted less stamina. That was no generic NPC following an AI script. There was a human intelligence, almost obsessive, behind every sword strike. The hero on the screen leaped over an ogre, using the monster's head as a springboard, and spun in midair. Kaito's white armor reflected so much sunlight that it dazzled the magic camera. Takeru felt a sting of uncomfortable familiarity, that aggressive playstyle, that habit of never staying still for more than 2 seconds. He had seen that thousands of times before, but on computer screens, fueled by cheap energy drinks and late-night voice calls. Then it happened. Surrounded by 3 stone golems, Kaito sheathed his sword for a fraction of a second. It was a useless stance in the original game, unless you exploited a specific frame data glitch that allowed for an instant critical hit. The hero shouted something inaudible and unleashed the strike. A vertical slash followed by a gravity-defying spinning kick. The Rising Dragon V2. The sound of the world seemed to fade away for Takeru. His leather briefcase full of expense reports slipped from his numb fingers and hit the stone floor with a dull thud. That combo wasn't in the game manual. That combo was a signature, a stupid and inefficient invention that only one person in the world used because it looked cool in the replay. Takeru's face lost its color, the Demon King mask cracking under the weight of the revelation. The magic camera zoomed in dramatically on the victorious hero's face. Beneath the spiky blonde hair and the anime protagonist's smile, Takeru saw the tics, the habit of wiping his nose with his thumb. It wasn't just the legendary hero destined to kill him. It was Kenji, his best friend, the only guy who would go to karaoke with him after work. The guide floated up to Akira's eye level, its error windows forming a grotesque smile that stretched from ear to ear. The system hadn't just brought in a hero to balance the game. It had brought the only person Akira would be unable to hurt. The mandatory task notification flashed on the Demon King's retina, cruel and absolute. Prepare for the final confrontation. Eliminate the threat. Takeru looked at his own hands, hands that now trembled not with fear, but with an anticipated grief. After the devastating shock of recognizing his best friend on the magic screen, Takeru expected the doors of the throne room to be kicked down at any second, but the attack did not come. Through the mystical security cameras, he watched Hiro Kaito setting up a luminous tent just past the main gate. It was the undeniable logic of RPGs. Before the final battle, the protagonist always stops at a save point to recover HP and organize their inventory. That technical pause, which in a game lasted only a click, would in reality give Takeru an entire night of agony. Unable to be alone with his thoughts and with the eliminate threat notification flashing on his retina, the Demon King made a desperate executive decision. He summoned a general meeting in the renovated corridors of Darkhold. The official reason, to celebrate the efficiency of the internal defenses. The real reason? He needed noise, people, and a distraction to keep from vomiting out of anxiety. Thus, the first mandatory happy hour in the history of darkness was decreed. The atmosphere in the corridor, transformed into a ballroom with fluorescent lights flashing to the rhythm of war drums, was of a palpable strangeness. Orcs held plastic cups with excessive delicacy, while skeletons tried to drink mead that leaked through their ribs. But Takeru's attempt to create a relaxed corporate environment was interrupted by a sharp drop in temperature. The shadows at the end of the corridor elongated and solidified. Emerging from the darkness like a stain of living ink, the Council of Elders appeared. They were 3 hunched figures, dressed in robes that seemed to absorb the ambient light, their white porcelain masks shining with a disturbing contrast. They glided across the carpeted floor, ignoring the newt-eye canapes. With voices that sounded like sandpaper scraping on bone, they began to criticize the modern decor and the lack of decorative impalements, questioning if the new Demon King had forgotten the traditions of terror in favor of spreadsheets and little parties. While Takeru tried to explain to the elders that psychological terror and administrative efficiency were the new meta of evil, he didn't notice the sneaky movement above the punch bowl. The guide, floating invisible to everyone except for the protagonist, hovered over the main beverage barrel. Its interface displayed a malicious, pixelated smile as it materialized a flask with a flaming skull icon. It was a Berserker Fury potion, legendary grade. With a digital chuckle that echoed only in Takeru's mind, the entity poured the bubbling purple liquid into the drink. The effect was instantaneous. A goblin who took a sip saw his eyes double in size and turn red like the neon of a system error. The murmur of office small talk was replaced by guttural growls. The corporate party was about to turn into a riot. Chaos exploded with the subtlety of a grenade in a library. 2 minotaurs began using the water cooler as a throwing weapon, while a group of harpies dove over the buffet, destroying the chipboard tables. Takeru found himself in the eye of the storm, dodging flying chairs and trying to maintain his regal posture. The Council of Elders, far from helping, seemed to enjoy the spectacle, casting shadow spells to liven up the brawl even further, transforming plastic forks into lethal daggers. When a solid iron mug flew toward the Demon King's head, a gray blur intercepted it in midair. It was Yara. With her expression of icy calm unaltered, she spun her greatsword broom, creating a vacuum of wind that repelled the attackers. She informed Takeru that the recreational activity had exceeded safety parameters and requested permission to initiate the lethal cleaning protocol. In knowing that a massacre would destroy any chance of redemption, Takeru climbed onto the improvised DJ booth. He activated his Demon King's aura ability, but channeled it through his administrator's vision. His voice thundered through the hall, not with death threats, but with the bureaucratic weight of a surprise audit. He declared that any property damage would be deducted directly from the payroll, and that unauthorized fury constituted an immediate breach of contract. The threat of wage cuts was more effective than any holy magic. The monsters, even under the effect of the potion, froze, their instinct for financial preservation overcoming their bloodlust. As order was restored and Yara began to sweep the debris, the guide floated to Takeru's ear. Its digital voice whispered that controlling monsters with the fear of dismissal was amusing but useless against the hero outside. If you cannot control them with real fear, the guide warned, I will take direct control, and I do not use memos. Dawn in Darkhold brought no birdsong, but rather the distant creaking of chains and the howling of cursed winds. In the monitoring room, with the bitter taste of the previous night's cold coffee still in his mouth, Takeru watched the magic screen with bloodshot eyes. The expiration date of his piece had arrived. Outside, on the castle perimeter, the barrier of holy light protecting Kaido's camp dissipated like mist in the sun. The hero stood, his immaculate white armor reflecting a light that seemed to offend the surrounding shadows. With the efficiency of someone who had already grinded through hundreds of dungeons, Kaido stowed his items and checked the sharpness of his sword. For Takeru, seeing his real-life best friend with that determined look, the look of someone about to wipe the entire server, caused a knot in his stomach tighter than the tie of his old work uniform. Beside him, floating with an aura of digital smugness, the guide displayed a countdown timer above its head, reminding the Demon King that the narrative would no longer accept bureaucratic delays. So Kaido's target was the Ash Plains region, a territory guarded by the loyal, yet intellectually limited, General Zog. Through the cameras, Takeru watched in horror as the massive orc intercepted the hero. Zog, eager to prove his worth after the previous night's threats of pay cuts, roared a challenge that made the ground tremble, spinning his double axe with enough force to split a mountain. But that wasn't a balanced game. It was a scripted massacre. Kaito didn't even slow down. With a fluid, almost lazy movement, he dodged Zog's titanic blow, leaving a trail of afterglow. The counterattack came in the form of an ascending solar slash. The general's heavy armor was sliced like paper, and the giant was hurled backward, colliding with a rock and kicking up a cloud of dust. Zog's HP bar entered the critical red zone in a single hit. The hero raised his sword for the mercy blow, the blade glowing with the promise of immediate execution. In the control room, Takeru didn't think. The fear of the guide and his punishments was momentarily eclipsed by the panic of seeing one of his subordinates, someone he was trying to train and protect, be deleted right in front of him. He activated the castle's emergency teleport, ignoring the mana consumption warnings. He needed to be there, not as a warrior, but as a manager intervening in a serious workplace accident. The world around Takeru distorted into shadows and reappeared instantly on the open plains. The smell of ozone and burnt grass filled his nostrils. He emerged exactly between Zog's fallen body and Kaito's descending blade. But Takeru did not draw a weapon. Instead, he raised a gloved hand in a gesture of absolute stop, channeling all of his Demon King's aura to create a crushing atmospheric pressure, not of murderous intent, but of pure bureaucratic authority. Kaito's sword stopped millimeters from Takeru's palm, locked by an invisible barrier of magical density. The impact of the shock created a wave of wind that cleared the surrounding dust, revealing the imposing silhouette of the Demon King, his black robes billowing violently. Behind him, Zog gazed at his master's back with tearful adoration, seeing there a savior god, unaware that Takeru was trembling inside just as much as he was. With his voice magically amplified and distorted by the helmet of shadows he projected to hide his human face, Takeru declared that the battle was suspended due to technical irregularities in the completion of the dual form. It was an absurd excuse, but delivered with such conviction and power that the very air seemed to agree. Kaito recoiled, his blue eyes wide not with fear, but with confusion. The silence that followed was heavier than steel. Kaito lowered his sword guard slightly, trying to process the figure in front of him. He was face to face with the final enemy, the source of all evil, but his radiance of justice instinct was not screaming to attack. There was something in that villain's posture, in the way he put himself at risk to protect a useless subordinate, that defied the logic of the game. Takeru broke into a cold sweat beneath the magical projection. He was too close. If Kaito attacked now, he would have to fight back to survive, and that would break his heart. But the hero did not attack. Instead, Kaito took a step forward, narrowing his eyes as the wind carried the words that would make Takeru's blood freeze. The hero asked, in a voice heavy with an impossible familiarity, who he really was, for his presence felt painfully like that of someone he had lost a long time ago. Kaito's question hung in the air, heavy and fraught with a dangerous hope. Beneath the helmet of shadows, Takeru felt his heart skip a beat. He opened his mouth, ready to say anything that might calm his best friend, perhaps even risk a partial truth. But the universe of Final Calamity allowed no deviations from the script. Before the first syllable could escape, the sound of the wind on the ash plains was replaced by a high-pitched screech, like the audio of a corrupted file being forced at maximum volume. The timer above the guide's head reached 0. The small floating sphere, usually annoying and colorful, convulsed in the air. Where there should have been a digital face expressing anger, lines of red code emerged, bleeding out of the interface. The mascot did not speak. He screamed in pure static. The sky above them flashed violently, inverting colors for a second, black clouds in a white sky, before tearing itself into geometric error patterns. The system had decided to initiate a forced intervention. The wave of distortion swept across the battlefield. Kaito recoiled, covering his eyes as the very ground beneath his boots lost its texture, becoming a cold and lifeless wireframe grid. But the worst effect was on the inhabitants of that world. General Zog, who seconds before looked at his master with adoration and gratitude, began to howl. The orc's muscles swelled grotesquely, tearing what remained of his uniform. His eyes, previously focused, turned into white pools of irrational fury. Zog stood up, ignoring his critical injuries as if his HP bar no longer existed, and swung his axe toward Kaito with a speed that defied physics, leaving a trail of dead pixels in the air. In the distance, at the castle's borders, the situation was identical. Takeru could see, through his long-range vision, smoke rising from Greenfield. The servants he had spent weeks training to be baristas and receptionists were now attacking the walls of the village they were supposed to protect. Yara fought desperately at the gate, using the flat of her gigantic sword to hold back the beasts without killing them, while protecting a terrified Princess Alara. Takeru realized, with a bitter taste in his mouth, that his forms and good intentions were useless against a corrupted system. He could not negotiate with glitches. If the world wanted a villain, if the system demanded a monster to restore order, he would have to give them the greatest of them all. He closed his eyes, stifling Akira's fear and anxiety, and pulled from the depths of his avatar all the accumulated malice he had been suppressing. When Takeru opened his eyes again, they were not human. They were abysses of absolute darkness. An aura of darkness, drawn in solid and dense black, exploded from his body, swallowing the sunlight and silencing the sound of the wind. The atmospheric pressure dropped so sharply that the ground cracked. Zog, in the middle of a frenzied attack against Kato, froze. Even the madness of the glitch recoiled before the primal fear emanating from the Demon King. With a voice that reverberated in the bones of everyone present, Takeru roared a single command: kneel. It was not a request. It was a law of physics rewritten by magic. Zog dropped his axe and slammed his forehead against the ground with force, trembling uncontrollably. Throughout the entire valley, the monsters halted their attacks and prostrated themselves. Kaito, protected by his sacred aura, was the only one who remained standing, but his face was pale. Silence returned, but now it was the silence of absolute terror. The visual glitches in the sky began to mend themselves, stitched back into reality by the forced submission of the monsters. The guide, recovering its spherical form but still pulsing with a red danger light, slowly descended to Takeru's eye level. The system had accepted the performance of the extreme villain, but at a cost. A new quest window appeared, not only for Takeru, but projected into the sky so that Kato could see it as well. The text glowed with lethal urgency. The guide announced, with its cheerful and distorted voice, that the tutorial was over. The final quest had been forcibly initiated. Kaito had exactly 24 hours to kill the Demon King. If he failed, the server would be deleted along with the entire existence of that world. Takeru maintained his stoic pose, but inside, Akira was screaming. He had just saved the world only to condemn himself. The silence that followed the system's announcement in the Ash Plains was more deafening than any battle cry. Takeru, still floating shrouded in his oppressive aura of darkness, looked down. There was Kaito, tiny against the gray vastness, holding his sword with trembling hands. Akira wanted to go down, to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, perhaps suggest a video game match to calm everyone down. But the red timer pulsing in the sky reminded him that the playtime shift was over. With a sweep of his cape that generated a wave of cutting wind, Takeru turned his back on his best friend. He flew toward Darkhold Castle, tearing through the clouds, feeling every pixel of his body weigh tons. Upon landing in the main courtyard, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Yara was there, her tactical maid armor covered in dust and soot, holding her greatsword broom with the firmness of someone expecting a siege. Upon seeing her master, she prostrated herself, her eyes shining with a fanatical and terrifying devotion. She reported that the defenses were ready and asked what the battle formation would be to slaughter the invading hero. Takeru sighed, the sound echoing strangely within his helmet. He activated his administrator vision and saw not Yara's combat stats, but the micro fissures in her weapon and the tremor of fatigue in her muscles. With a slow gesture, he materialized not a new weapon, but a white letterhead envelope. He handed the paper to her. It was not an attack order. It was a letter of recommendation and a decree of permanent paid leave. He ordered, in the coldest and most authoritative voice he could forge, that she take all non-combatant servants and evacuate the castle immediately. Yara read the document, her hands trembling. For the first time, the perfect killing machine wept, not out of fear, but from the confusion of receiving mercy from a monster. As the lesser servants rushed toward the emergency exits, routes that Akira had insisted on building according to fire safety regulations, he headed toward Princess Alara. She stood beside the immense and unconscious body of General Zog, who was snoring loudly enough to make the windows vibrate, his mental glitch temporarily shut down by the faint. Takeru opened the side gates with a magical thought. He explained without looking into her eyes that the kidnapping had been cancelled due to a lack of budget, and that she was free to take the giant orc as a pet if she wished. Alara, however, did not run. She adjusted her silk gloves and stared fixedly at the Demon King. With an insight that always startled Akira, she said she knew what he was doing. She claimed that history would say the villain was defeated, but she would ensure the true legend survived between the lines. Before departing, magically dragging Zog's heavy body, she gave a deep bow, not of submission, but of respect between equals. Takeru felt a lump in his throat. He was succeeding in saving everyone except himself. When Darkhold Castle stood empty, the silence, once oppressive, was now merely lonely. Takeru walked to the throne room, his footsteps echoing on the newly polished black marble floor. He sat on the obsidian throne, which still felt far too uncomfortable for his salaryman's back. The guide hovered in a corner, watching with its multiple digital eyes, waiting for any deviation from the script. But Akira was not going to deviate. On the contrary, he was going to professionalize the script. He pulled a notepad and a fountain pen from thin air. With the meticulousness of someone planning a quarterly presentation, he began to write the choreography for the final fight. He was planning Kaido's victory in the smallest details, ensuring that his friend would not only win, but feel like a true hero without ever suspecting that the fight had been thrown. Hours passed like seconds. Akira reviewed the document 3 times, correcting continuity errors and adjusting the timing of the dramatic dialogues. He was so absorbed in his screenwriting work that he barely noticed when the room's temperature suddenly rose. The system timer, visible only to him, showed less than an hour remaining. But fate, impatient as ever, decided to move up the schedule. A thunderous crash shook the castle's foundations. The hall's gigantic double doors, reinforced with ancestral magic and black steel, were not opened. They were obliterated. A white light, blinding and purifying, flooded the gothic environment, casting Takeru's long and distorted shadow against the throne. At the center of the light, with his armor shining like a supernova star and his holy sword in hand, stood Kaido. The hero did not wait the 24 hours. His gaze held no hesitation, only a sad and lethal determination. The final client had arrived for the meeting, and Akira, hiding the script behind his back, stood up to greet him. There was no exchange of pleasantries or opening monologues. As soon as the dust from the destroyed doors settled, Kaido charged forward. It was a blur of white light and fury, too fast for any NPC, but painfully slow to Takeru's administrator eyes. The Demon King didn't even need to rise from his throne immediately. He merely tilted his head to the left, letting the holy blade pass millimeters from his ear, cutting only a few strands of digitally perfect hair. Akira felt cold sweat trickling down beneath his armor. The script he had written said, "Minute 1, take a hit to the shoulder to give hope." But Kaido wasn't fighting with hope. He was fighting with despair. Every strike from the hero came charged with a suicidal force, ignoring his own defense. If Akira followed the script and let himself be hit now, the sword wouldn't stop at his shoulder. It would cleave him in half, and if he counterattacked with his true strength, Kaido would turn into pixelated mush. The graceful defeat plan was going down the drain. Akira would have to improvise the performance of a lifetime, fight seriously enough not to die, but softly enough not to kill his best friend. The throne room became a stage of strobe lights. Takeru finally rose, and the dance began. When Kaido used the rising solar slash, Akira didn't use a generic magic barrier. He took a sidestep of exactly 3 pixels and used the back of his hand to deflect the blade at its balance point, neutralizing the impact. Kaido's eyes widened. He recognized that move. Confused, the hero retreated and shouted, asking who that monster really was. Akira tried to respond with his heart in his hand, saying, "It's me, you idiot, stop killing yourself." But the intent translation ring glowed with a violent black light. The voice that came out of Takeru's helmet was deep and distorted. "Your incompetence bores me, worm. Strive harder before I erase you from existence." And however, something was wrong. The translation ring began to sizzle. A thin smoke rose from the black gem. The disparity between Akira's brotherly love and the malice forced by the item was so great that the magic was collapsing. Kaido hesitated, lowering his guard. He felt the lie. He saw that, despite the cruel words, Takeru had intentionally diverted an energy beam that could have decapitated the hero seconds ago. It was at that moment that the guide decided the show was going off script. The floating mascot, who until then had been watching while eating digital popcorn, turned red. The air around him distorted, transforming into glitches of aggressive neon colors. "Cut!" the guide screeched. The guide's terminal appeared violently in front of Kaido, not as a warning window, but as a physical wall, pushing him forward, forcing his arm to deliver a fatal blow against an Akira who was paralyzed by the system. Kaido's sword lunged forward, propelled by the invisible force of the system. The glowing tip tore through Takeru's chest armor, drawing a line of blood across the protagonist's chest. But then, it stopped. With muscles trembling and veins bulging in his neck, Kaido fought against the game's own physics to break the attack. He looked into the Demon King's eyes, not at the aura, but at the tired and familiar gaze behind it. "You always chose the tank class because you were afraid of hurting others," Kaido whispered, tears washing the soot from his face. The recognition was the final blow. With a sound of shattering glass, the translation ring exploded on Akira's finger, unable to contain the truth. Free from the curse, Akira screamed, his real voice echoing through the hall for the first time. "Kenji, watch the aggro!" The two friends turned in unison. They were no longer hero and villain. They were 2 veteran players side by side, facing the guide, which was now expanding into a monstrosity of corrupted code, furious at having its ending ruined. The final confrontation was not decided by a burst of apocalyptic magic, but by an excess of incompatible data. Facing the monstrosity of glitches and neon that the guide had become, Takeru and Kaido did not act as mortal enemies, but as a perfectly synchronized raid party. The final Calamity server, designed to sustain an eternal conflict between light and darkness, began to overheat as it tried to process the logic of the hero healing the Demon King while the Demon King tanked damage for the hero. With a smile that blended nostalgia and adrenaline, Kaido launched his final attack, aiming not at Akira's physical body, but at the code structure that enveloped the environment. Takeru, using his administrator authority, rewrote the definition of the damage received from fatal to server maintenance. The guide let out a digital screech, a cacophony of dial-up modem sound as pop-up error windows buried him. Unable to cope with the fundamental break in the script, the entity collapsed upon itself, imploding into a singularity of white pixels that swallowed the throne room. When the white light dissipated, the world had not ended. It had simply been updated. The blood-red sky of Darkhold had cleared to a pleasant twilight tone, and the castle's gargoyles looked less threatening and more decorative. In the center of the ruins, Yara emerged from the rubble, her great sword broom in hand, ready to defend the mortal remains of her master. What she found, however, was her lord sitting upon a piece of masonry, sharing a mana potion with the supposed mortal enemy. Takeru, now free from the distorted voice, cleared his throat to assume his CEO persona. He explained to his confused subordinate that this was not a truce, but a hostile merger and acquisition. The official narrative would be that the Empire of Evil had acquired the hero's assets to optimize world management. Yara blinked slowly, processing the information before her eyes sparkled with fanatical admiration. To her, enslaving the hero through bureaucratic contracts was a much more sophisticated form of evil than simply killing him. Weeks passed, and the landscape around the castle changed drastically. The old human village, once the stage for constant battles, now boasted signs reading Special Economic Zone. Kaido, stripped of his shining armor and wearing a simple linen shirt, used his superhuman strength to carry entire wooden beams, laughing as he chatted with orcs carrying bricks. The former hero seemed lighter, free from the weight of having to save the world alone every 5 minutes. The most surreal scene, however, was headlined by General Zog. The giant of hypertrophied muscles, who once crushed skulls, now used his double-bladed axe with surgical precision to cut the ribbon at the grand opening of the new community center and bakery. Beside him, Princess Alara, acting as liaison diplomat, applauded with protocolary elegance, though her comic mode eyes betrayed that she still found the entire situation completely absurd. Far from the construction dust, atop the highest tower of Darkhold Castle, two old friends watched the horizon. Takeru had improvised a lounge chair and wore sunglasses over his gothic armor, holding a colorful drink with a little umbrella. He commented with a deep sigh that, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, he felt that the weekend had finally arrived. There were no more quests, no more death threats, nor the constant fear of being the villain. Kaido, sitting on the low wall swinging his legs, agreed. He mentioned how ironic it was that they had to die and reincarnate in a fantasy world just to achieve a healthy work-life balance. The conversation flowed into memories of their old gaming sessions, laughing at the flawed builds they used to make, and how reality now seemed like just an extension of those sleepless nights, but with better graphics and real stakes. The piece, however, lasted exactly 15 minutes. The sound of metallic heels echoed across the terrace. Yara appeared, blocking the sun, with a gravity-defying stack of scrolls balanced in one hand. She coldly informed them that, although world peace had been achieved, the logistics of maintaining that peace required the immediate approval of budgets, land zoning, and trade treaties with the neighboring kingdoms. Before Takeru could fake a feint to escape the paperwork, the air in front of them flickered. It wasn't the aggressive red glitch of the old guide, but a blue light, clean and corporate. A new terminal materialized, floating gently. Kaido and Akira exchanged worried glances and stepped closer. On the screen, a simple message pulsed, promising that the vacation was over before it had even begun. System rebooted successfully, detecting new content, DLC expansion, the abyss beyond the sea initiated.